Injuries are part and parcel of MMA as a sport. But as much as we love seeing a brutal knockout or an all-out war, watching a fighter suffer a truly serious injury always puts a downer on proceedings. It's like a cruel reminder of just how dangerous this sport can be. This video ain't for the faint of heart, folks. Here are 10 UFC fighters who got seriously damaged. Anderson Silva, broken fibula and tibia. To kick things off, we have one of the saddest images the fight game has ever produced. Anderson Silva's reign atop the UFC middleweight division was for the most part just about as thrilling a time for the sport as we have ever seen. But when his now legendary run as champion finally came to an end, it was just as dramatic as you might expect. Faced with the rising contender Chris Weidman, Silva's showboating cost him dearly in their first fight, and after trying to clown around with a powerful wrestler, a stray hook caught him clean on the chin, ending his title reign there and then. The rematch, however, would be a memorable contest for very different reasons. Silva, who seemed far less interested in playing around this time, had a kick off his check by Weidman early in the second round. The impact caused his leg to totally cave in underneath him, shattering as he stepped back on it. This marked the final days of Anderson Silva's prime, and in truth, it was an injury that he never fully recovered his form from. TJ Dillashaw, shoulder injuries. TJ Dillashaw is one incredibly competitive dude. So competitive, in fact, that he decided to take on the bantamweight champion of the world with a shoulder that would not stay put in its socket through fight camp. Dillashaw's matchup with Aljamain Sterling was one of those Hail Mary attempts at greatness that just backfired in the most dramatic way possible. Dillashaw knew that his shoulder was toast if it popped out of its socket, which it had already apparently done multiple times during camp, but against his better judgment, TJ took the fight, wasting all of our time with a title shot that amounted to a totally uncompetitive beating and a TKO defeat. To make matters worse, the damage Dillashaw had done to himself was so extensive that he retired from the sport shortly after, putting a dark stain on his final days in the sport. Joanna Jedrzejczyk, hematoma. Joanna Jedrzejczyk is a total warrior in the cage, and she proved this beyond any doubt by engaging in one of the craziest fights in MMA history against the strawweight champion Weili Zhang. In that bout, these two 115-pound legends threw down at a ridiculous level of output for 5 rounds, barely slowing down in one of the fastest-paced fights you are ever likely to see. Zhang had the clear power advantage, but even with that being the case, Joanna was never out of the fight. The problem? Well, Zhang's constant onslaught eventually left Joanna with the biggest hematoma we've ever seen in an MMA fight. By the fight's closing moments, Jedrzejczyk was totally unrecognizable, and her face had swelled to a truly gargantuan alien-like mask. To make matters worse, Joanna would lose the fight by narrow decision, although both women left that arena as winners in the eyes of the fans. Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, broken arm. Some legends go out in a blaze of glory, others fizzle out slowly over time, but for Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira, it's pretty fair to say that his lowest moment was truly crazy to behold. Facing off against one of the best American submission artists in the sport, Frank Mir, Big Nog was able to dish out some real damage on his opponent early, dazing the former champion badly. But with the competitive rivalry between the two of them being what it was, Nogueira, instead of trying to TKO Mir, instead decided to roll off for a guillotine, hoping to put any discussions about who had the better BJJ to bed once and for all. Unfortunately, this allowed Mir just enough time to recover, survive, reverse position, and eventually latch onto a Kimura. All of a sudden, Big Nog had gone from a hugely advantageous position to being on the verge of losing. To his credit, Nogueira's pride wouldn't allow him to tap, but Mir used the position to snap his arm, making for one of the most violent finishes the sport has ever seen. Jon Jones, dislocated toe. Had he survived in there with Jon Jones for just a few seconds more, Chael Sonnen would have been your new light heavyweight champion. Funnily enough, if he had lasted another minute or two with Anderson Silva, he'd have middleweight gold in his locker too. But in one of the most one-sided championship fights you'll ever see, Jon Jones schooled Sonnen at his own game, wrestling him into oblivion before TKOing him late in round 1. Seemed like a run-of-the-mill win, right? Well, as soon as Jon's post-fight interview began, he noticed that his toe was a bloody mess, totally bent and dislocated out of place. As soon as he spotted this, the pain rushed to his head too. But what's crazy here is that Chael would have been awarded a doctor stoppage win without any questions had he made it back to his corner. Jones' toe was totally screwed up, but he was also just leagues ahead of the bad guy's talent. Matt Mitrione, fractured orbital plus dislocated shoulder. Why get one injury when you can bag yourself two? Well, for Matt Mitrione, a disastrous night at the office against Travis Browne left him with a massive hematoma above his eye. That hematoma was so bad that it eventually led to a fractured orbital, leaving Mitrione impaired and with blurry vision. A pair of terrible eye pokes only served to make matters worse for the heavyweight veteran, but things were about to go from bad to worse for Mitrione, and just before his eventual TKO defeat in the third round, he would dislocate his shoulder, turning an already awful night into a total horror show. This would be the last time that Mitrione competed in the UFC, and to be honest, it's hard to imagine a more unsavory ending to a promotional career. Conor McGregor, broken fibula plus tibia. This next one was just insane to watch live. The heated third meeting between Conor McGregor and Dustin Poirier left all of the niceties and camaraderie at the door. This time, things were incredibly personal, and all that negative energy made the first round a truly fiery affair. But just as things were starting to get interesting, Conor's leg totally gave out from underneath him, leading to a truly confusing moment of total uncertainty post-fight, where the commentator scrambled to try and figure out what had gone wrong. As it turned out, McGregor had developed a hairline fracture during camp, and when the fight night came, his fibula and tibia had broken in the most dramatic way possible. The fight was of course stopped then and there, and Conor would spend the next 18 months rehabbing his way to his eventual return. But to suffer an injury of that severity at such a pivotal point in his career, yeah, it ain't gonna be easy. Alistair Overeem, torn lip. Sure, there are more devastating injuries on this list, but for our money, the sheer level of cosmetic damage done by Jairzinho Rozenstruik to Alistair Overeem's lip was more than worthy of a spot on our list. Rozenstruik hits like a truck, that much is clear. And though Overeem was dealing with his offense handily coming into the final minute of the fight, with just 4 seconds left on the clock of the 25, he was left on the canvas wondering what the hell had just happened. Rozenstruik had pulled off a comeback for the ages, splitting Overeem's lip right down in the middle in the process. The image of Overeem's grotesque facial damage was just about as rough a facial injury as MMA has ever seen. And though he would rebound with a 2-fight streak of victories, this loss really does stand out in his back catalog in terms of it just being totally brutal. Chris Weidman, broken fibula. Irony can be a truly cruel thing in MMA, and when it does come around, it generally brings some very painful results. And for Chris Weidman, the oddly poetic end to his prime fighting years was like something out of a totally unrealistic movie script. After making his name on the back of an upset knockout win over Anderson Silva, Weidman also scored a victory in the rematch, this time by checking a leg kick of Silva's, resulting in the horrific leg break we discussed earlier in the video. Jump forward 8 years, and Weidman's career prospects were truly turning south. After failing to find any real momentum at 185 pounds, a matchup against Uriah Hall seemed like the perfect opportunity for the All-American to regain some of his form. But in one of the strangest turns of events in MMA history, 17 seconds into the fight, a checked leg kick snapped Weidman's leg in two in a nearly identical sequence to the one suffered by his old rival Silva. Seriously, the chances of this happening were truly 1 in a million. Michael Bisping, detached retina. And finally, we come to the former UFC middleweight champion, Michael Bisping, a man whose full ordeal was not known to us until long after his retirement. Before his late career resurgence and rise to the very top of the division, Bisping had the misfortune of running into the infamous TRT Vitor, the version of Vitor Belfort that was given an odd and totally controversial exemption from the use of TRT during the later years of his prime. And right in the middle of a run that contained vicious finishes of Luke Rockhold and Dan Henderson, Belfort put a total beatdown on the count, nailing with multiple hard shots to the head and body before eventually finishing him with a picture-perfect head kick. What we didn't realize at the time was that the kick in question actually caused Bisping to suffer a detached retina, an injury that would eventually lead him to losing his entire eye. To this day, Bisping has some understandable contempt for Belfort, knowing that he uses TRT the way he did and how it affected his success in the cage. But hey, Bisping still managed to win UFC gold with one working eye, and that was one hell of an accomplishment.